Just want to do a fairly quick video talking about our political situation. Right now, there are a number of different groups who reject the status quo and yet who are infighting with each other about what's the next step. Now, I've always seen it as obvious that the next step would be to get everyone who wants to do their own thing, allow them to do their own thing, and then create a confederation of all those people who respect the rights of others to do their own thing. And this is why I was drawn to libertarianism, because it seems like the perfect macro framework under which a wide variety of micro communities can operate without destroying each other's cultures, without being violent towards each other, because that's sort of the spectrum that we're caught between. Do we do the globalist method of including our sense of in-group to all of humanity, or do we go the conservative route of bringing in the in-group to the most local level and shutting yourself off from others? I don't think either of those is the best way to go. I feel like there is a cooperative, competitive solution that I feel is a little bit more organic. If you look at what life does, in the beginning you have cells that are sort of self-interested, and then eventually groups of cells that are similar begin cooperating together and fighting against groups of cells that are not similar. And then eventually they sort of overcome this competitive instinct and form not just multicellular bacteria, but specialized members of a whole different level of organism. When you start getting cells acting as, proteins and muscle fibers, and cells acting as skeletal structures. I mean, the cells don't really think of, in their day-to-day interaction with each other, the unit that they're producing. And they get to have their specialization, but at the same time, they're not all killing each other. They're existing in a symbiosis. And I feel that libertarianism, as it's sometimes conceived, in the sense that we ought to ignore how these different countries relate to each other, just let's be at peace, but let's ignore each other. This sort of isolationist tendency is just misguided, and it doesn't account for externalities. The fact is that we do share a planet, and that pollution and resources are something that all of humanity shares. So what we need to do is come up with a system that allows for cooperation, that also allows for this specialization and retention of culture. Like I said, we can go the New World Order route to merge everyone together into a blob, or we could go the conservative route of locking yourself up in your little, Dunbar's unit number and ignoring the rest of the world. Or we can cooperate. And that's the only way that I see anything getting done. Mad Scarat, it's like mad scientist rat, so mad sci rat, I guess would be the way to pronounce it, who I referred to in my secular monastery video, he talks about this in terms of competitors, cooperators, and competitor cooperators. Now, cooperators will always lose against competitors because the competitors will just step in and do what the cooperators are unwilling to do. Whereas the competitor-cooperator, who prefers cooperation but isn't afraid of using competition against competitors, is the best of both worlds and ends up winning. So those who want to treat the outgroup as an enemy are not going to succeed compared to those who want to treat the outgroup primarily as an object for cooperation. Live peacefully with the world and only defend yourself from those who would seek to reduce peace. Now, what are the implications for YouTube? There's a lot of tribes on YouTube. There's a lot of in-groups that are certain of the validity of their position, but no position is certain. We're using language, first of all, which means that we're not going to arrive at any objective truths here. We're always going to rely on our individual sensibilities, our individual moralities. So, the best thing, in my eyes, to do is to grab all those people who reject the status quo, who want something better, and to put them in a confederation, an alliance intellectually that says, we will defend each other, we have each other's backs, but we are not each other. We retain our individual identities, and yet we plug ourselves into this macroorganism. Now, what's the structure of that macroorganism? I don't know. We're so far away from even coming close to finding it that I couldn't hope to speculate. But we can see sort of the mutated, ugly version of what it would be in international trade. I mean, some countries are better at producing certain goods, and so markets emerge that capitalize on this specialization. And as a whole, we produce this macroorganism. The issue is that some countries are treating resources as national commodities, even when they're outside their own borders. Some countries reject the sort of rules of international trade and manipulate their currencies in ways that prevent others from competing fairly. There's just no agreement on what we're all here for. And that's because what we've arrived at has been, for the most part, unarticulated. We evolved into this system, and you can expect the kinds of tendencies that will happen out of evolutionary systems to happen here. And so the people who were willing to grab power over many generations got it. Now we have a bunch of bastards running things who aren't really constructing useful international systems of trade. I mean, it's useful in perpetuating their wealth, but not useful in satisfying human want. And that's the thing. Evolution will ensure that power structures succeed to their fullest potential, but evolution does not care about your happiness. I mean, just look at the fact that you're not usually happy. Probably, if you're healthy, you're about half the time happy, half the time sad. I mean, whatever your medium is, it's measured against your other experiences. So, evolution does not want to put you in a state of perpetual happiness, but humans do. And so if you want to live in a system that satisfies human want, it needs to be constructed by humans. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't use market principles and laws of nature that we observe and the knowledge of those things in constructing it, but why would we just allow the status quo to continue when we know that it has not been constructed with human happiness in mind? It's been constructed with the optimization of wealth production, which is not the same as human happiness, because the types of wealth that get produced sometimes, like the military-industrial complex, have nothing to do with satisfying human want. In fact, they are antithetically opposed to the satisfaction of human want. So that's sort of my proposal. Reject the status quo, primarily. And everyone who rejects the status quo needs to cooperate to form another power structure that can even begin to compete. So white nationalists out there who are just thinking about white nationalists are thinking wrong. And black nationalists who are just thinking of black nationalism are thinking wrong. Egalitarians who believe egalitarianism must be the only way are thinking wrong. Everyone who thinks that their way is the right way is wrong. What we need to do is get over that perception of our political structures being right or wrong and move into a situation where we take those values, retain them to satisfy our want, because our value is an expression of our want, retain those values and plug them into a system that maximizes the individual capability of each group. Now, does this imply a government above it all? That's a tricky question. I don't really think so. I don't think it needs to. I think we can use pure market principles as long as we set guidelines like nonviolence and gold standard. I don't know what those standards would be exactly yet. Like I've said, this kind of thing has not been tried, at least not successfully. I don't know. It really all just comes back to the issue that people believe their morality is right everywhere. And no one has ever been right in the past. Whenever we look at past cultures, we always say, this was pretty good, but they did this wrong. Or this was pretty good, and they did this wrong. And then when we look at the way we do things, we think, well, the way we do things is right. Not everyone is so stupid, but I feel like most people are leaning that way. Most people, like white nationalists, who believe that it would actually be better for a group of white people to control the lives of black people because black people are so clearly inferior. Like, there are people like that. And they're just getting trapped in their morality. Because even things like violence, like intra-community violence, what I would term more cultural violence than institutional violence, that is a cultural value. It's not something that's wrong or right. Even things like murder and rape within the animal species. Many animals procreate primarily by rape. Ducks, for example. Ducks, this is kind of a weird anecdote, but there's like a sexual evolutionary battle happening between female and male ducks. The female, in order to select for which male she wants to fertilize her eggs, she will, well, I mean, not consciously, obviously, but her vagina will evolve in weird shapes. Like, to literally act as sort of a lock that will keep the wrong ones out and the right ones in. And what the male penis in ducks has been doing is adapting to this in this crazy, like, curly Q, like, really fast shooting out erection that's so bizarre. Anyway, but that's just another way of doing things. And yet we in the human species think that rape is absolutely wrong everywhere. And, like, even a lot of people who hear that, like, my sister's a feminist, and when I would talk about something like that, she'd be like, well, I'm just someone who thinks that rape is wrong. And I'm like, well, I understand that you're, like, emotionally certain of your position, but intellectually, are you actually providing an argument, or are you just stating what you're emotionally certain of? Because your emotional certainty has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with your subjective reality, has nothing to do with any moral certitude out there. So the idea that crime as it exists in black communities is wrong, even, just doesn't hold up. Because it can only be wrong from a particular standpoint, and calling blacks inferior for their values it also doesn't hold up. Now, you can prefer your values, and you can want to be around people who have your values. That doesn't mean that you have to try and restrict the rights of other cultures to live according to their cultural values. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that some black people can't reject their cultural values and try and form communities that are constructing better values in their eyes. It's all about values. That's all politics is. A lot of people who think that a particular political structure is right probably aren't questioning what is my subjective preference on this and what is objective about it that makes it right. Libertarianism, again, I just think of as the optimum framework to allow for a confederacy of those people who want to cooperate but want to retain their identity. Now, what's the best way to achieve this? A lot of people think that the United States, if it was made libertarian, would be the perfect structure. Like a constitutional government is the perfect structure for this. I sort of doubt it, because a constitution of any sort still relies on this idea of a social contract. And I mean, that's just... Social contracts have no validity unless each individual really signs into it. And that's why a system where there was no social contract guiding everything together, just sort of a recognition of the non-aggression principle. Not that I'm like viewing that as absolutely right. I'm just saying, in the society that I want to construct, it would be a confederation based on non-aggression and economic freedom, not even the enforcement of property rights, because property rights aren't a universal thing. Some people think there should be land ownership, some people think there shouldn't be. Land ownership, in my opinion, is sort of a ridiculous concept. The land is just where we are. Who can own the thing that they were born on? It preceded you. You can protect it so that you're the only one who gets to use it, but that concept of ownership is just a concept. It's not something that's out there. So what would be better to do, rather than focusing on these abstract principles of liberty and freedom that, above all else, should be preserved in terms of libertarianism, like libertarian realist sort of has been talking about, I would view libertarianism as only that structure which allows freedom between systems. Because if you have freedom between systems, that allows for a market of political ideas. Because value is different. Libertarian realist, what makes you think that the freedom you value is the freedom that others should value? Why is my freedom, where I want some dictatorial countries to exist, I want some, I don't even know. It's not right. It's not right. It's not real. It's just your value. Libertarianism provides a platform, but it is nothing more than that. You can prefer your way of life, but does that mean that you must preclude other ways of life from cooperating with you? They don't need to influence your life. You just need to acknowledge that there's the potential for cooperation. I acknowledge that there is the potential for cooperation with any political ideology. I don't even care what it is. I will cooperate with any political ideology. That's what I'm saying. And if we would all just get there and make the rejection of the status quo primary, that would be our solution. Because all this infighting between all these tribes is getting nowhere. It never has gotten anywhere. We have the sense, because we are individually moving forward on our intellectual journeys, and we're individually having a greater sense of the rightness of our political models, we have a sense that the dialectic is proceeding forward towards a zenith of a political actualization. It seems like an inevitability that all these ideas are converging and something's going to happen out of it. It never has. So, peace, love, I don't know, peace. It all has to do with what your sense of self-identity is, And people were talking about this in the comments. So, is my sense of individual identity more important than my communal identity? Not objectively. Objectively, your identity is a transitory thing. You can call your legal identity and your name as a thing which persists throughout your whole life, and that's still you the whole time. But physically, that's not the real situation. The real situation is you're eating stuff, you're making it a part of you, and you excrete the old stuff that was a part of you. Not strictly. Some of the food doesn't actually get absorbed into you in the first place, and that's why it's kicked out. But also your dead cells and stuff get kicked out with you. So you're already a member of an ecosystem that operates at a level above you, and you can just as easily think of your identity. Identity is a construct. You can think of your identity as being something that's the group around you. You can think of it as your race. You can think of it as humanity. You can think of it as life. You can think of it as the universe. Because everything is connected. And honestly, that's the most accurate. Your identity is the universe, because you can't be delineated out objectively, only subjectively, from the universe. The system of which you're a part is interconnected at every point, is a continuum consistently through the rest of reality. So to say that my individual identity is more important, or the identity of my family is more important, is only an emotional appeal. And people say that, well, you would just let someone come in and kill your family, you're not going to hate them for doing that. It's like, you misunderstand the concept of hate and love that some of us are talking about when you say stuff like that. Love and hate is not necessarily just an emotional point of view. For me, it really is a metaphysical point of view. Love is incorporating greater and greater self-identity outward, because the universe is all fundamentally connected. Hate is reducing that sense of identity down to an individual. When you reduce your sense of identity down lower, then that means there are more threats to you. Now, this sort of puts into question, is political action even necessary in the first place? Can you just live with the knowledge that all this violence, all of it, is just the way of things? That's sort of the Hindu way of going about it. You carry out your cultural obligation, but meanwhile you recognize that it's just part of a wheel that's turning that you don't need to get so involved in. And actually, the more involved you are in it, and the more certain you are of your self-identity, the more suffering you will engage in. So, there's that. Alternatively, there is the involvement despite the detachment. So, is it wrong to do the same thing as your ancestors and want to start communities based on the adapting values of the time? I don't think it's wrong. I don't think anything is wrong. So that's my biological desire. That's what this body wants to do. It wants to produce some political solutions for those who don't have political solutions now. And that includes both white nationalists, conservatives, libertarians, and also black nationalist socialists. Everyone is a possible partner in this. So, I don't know. What is all the fighting? What is it? It's one of those things I don't really understand perfectly. It's just that hate and love. And maybe I'm still not being clear. I don't think I'm ever really being clear, just because it's language. And you're hearing what you want to hear from me. You're not hearing what I'm saying in my mind. Because that's really what I'm thinking. My reality of this is not the words that I'm saying. And people like Obvious Atheist did a little response to me. Misspelled my name, but that's cool. Asking why I called white people they. That's the word that I was using, but it doesn't really convey the thought that I had going on in my head. And of course, we can only criticize each other on the words that we use, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because those words are only words. What matters is the thought lying underneath. And you probably don't know the thought lying underneath. And I probably don't know how to articulate it well enough that you will understand it. So, when you're getting all wrapped up in your definition of a word, it's only your definition. All words, Fringe Element seems to have just sort of come upon this realization recently when he was talking about racism. And he focused on the term racism, but all terms are that way. The only way to get past it, in my mind, is to increase the scope of a particular dialectic between two people. Because that's sort of the literal space, the made objective space, the space of language, that you can, over time, merge your definitional sets into a point of mutual compatibility. Now, that's a big task, and I think that if we're going to try and do something that I'm talking about, which is to create a multicellular organism with the cells being individual cultures that are sort of self-contained, we don't need to come to a language to talk between all of us. All we really need is for the leaders of all those communities, and that's who I make this channel for, is people who want to be leaders. If you want to be a follower, I'm not particularly talking to you. It's like, to quote Nietzsche, even though Chief Justice Koch just talked about how that was immature, I don't care. Nietzsche was a lonely guy. Of course he was immature. He did the same sort of thing that any lonely person does. He lashes out emotionally and defends himself and thinks of his own superiority. But anyway, Nietzsche would say that he's not a universal anarchist. He's an anarchist of the masters. Masters need to come to this realization of the relativistic truth, not everyone else. The subjects cling to the masters because the cultures themselves are multicellular organisms, and only the brain or only the consciousness of a people really needs to have an understanding of the way values are constructed. Everyone else needs a religion. Everyone else needs a god. It's only where that tip of the triangle exists that the values are projected downward, and they need to understand how that's constructed. Well, anyway, if you're watching this, and if you watched all of these, I'm not trying to talk in a way that will be understandable for everyone. I'm not talking to the general person, really. I think that if you watch this and you consider yourself a general person, is it a dangerous sort of... I don't know, it's a weird question. Again, Chief Justice Koch, in another video about art, said how you have to think of, is your art medicine or poison? Well, who is your art directed for in the first place? And I will say now, my art is directed for people who want to be masters. I'm not concerned with subjects, because they're pretty much fine. They'll live happy lives, because they know their place. Masters usually, in today's society especially, when they get to a particular point, realize that the value is just arbitrary, and they don't know what to do, and they feel lost and hopeless, and some people go to antinatalism, but the response that historically works is affirming, is saying that, okay, well, the conclusion I've come to is that I am the god of the religions, but of the people. I am the person who constructs value, who constructs law. So that's who I'm talking to. And all the people who want to construct value and construct law, whatever your community is, that's a reflection of your value. And no master is right or wrong. Masters live in anarchy above it all. That's why a sort of confederacy of masters who have their own diverse viewpoints is pretty necessary. And I think that that's really what's going on now in the sort of globalist banking elite, is a bunch of masters who have their morality and their way of doing things, and they don't all agree. They only say that, okay, we'll conspire together for our mutual benefit, but, we don't have to come to any consensus. I mean, even explicitly, in what is known, some of these fraternal organizations have, one of those things that Alex Jones, uncovered a long time ago about the ritual of, the giving up of care, or the sacrifice of care, I can't remember. It was a bunch of, politicians and bankers getting together in hoods and enacting this whole weird ritual in front of a giant owl, where they're, abolishing the idea of care or involvement in the thing. Really, it's just an articulation of those Hindu values, and really, those Hindu values are just the Aryan values, and that reflect that metaphysics, as I've said before. People have been aware of this for a long time. The reason I'm articulating it to people now on YouTube is that we haven't been, in the last, 300 years, taking advantage of the intellectual capital which has risen up in the lower classes. I mean, probably innate potential in the peasants has been around for as long as there's been peasants, but the education or the access to resources to really develop those intelligences hasn't been around until more recently. And so now that it is, we can use these sorts of vehicles to reach out to former peasants who want to become masters. So there are much more of those former peasants with the potential for masterhood than there are true masters, which means that as long as those masters can create communities of their own value, they'll out-leverage the other masters. People like being led, and it's sort of an insecurity on the part of the people who would be masters today that they project their political values upward and say that why doesn't society act this way? instead of taking the responsibility individually to create a community for themselves. You can't rely on universal political action. You can only rely on your construction of an artistic framework, of a mythological framework, for your values to be transmuted in a form that's receptible to the general population. I'm not very good at doing that. I'll try and develop that skill as I go on. I'm much better at just talking honestly, and I really don't like the sort of hiding behind art. I'd rather just speak plainly insofar as what's plain to me. My plane is not everyone's plane. But if it is your plane, if you understand what I'm talking about, then you're exactly who I'm talking to. If you still don't know what I'm talking to, then you're the person who I was referring to earlier. And that's fine, and you'll be happier for it. And I'm jealous of you. I feel like I'm still being arrogant, but I can't help it, because lately I've been rereading a lot of Nietzsche. And it rubs off on you. So, I think that was what I wanted to say. Basically, yeah, a lot of misinterpretation of what I was trying to get at in the peace video, and a lot of frustration on my part with the way white nationalists carry themselves. If you could get those masterly people, if you could get those people who want to reject the status quo and create a value of their own, to stop being convinced of their moral superiority, and start talking in a terminology that has the potential to reach out to the general public, then we might get somewhere with these ideas. If white nationalists stopped being associated with hate and started being associated with peace and love, there might be some different opinions. I mean, liberalism has taken off by taking advantage of the natural empathic instinct. The desire for peace and love is nearly universal. And if you project that your system is to maximize peace and love, then people will love you for it. Unless you're against the status quo, in which case you'll get killed for it. Historically, that seems to be the case. As I believe George Carlin put it. And probably a bunch of comedians. It's just one of those facts that people who come in preaching for love and compassion and a cessation of the conflict aren't treated well. That's because people are addicted to the conflict, and they believe the conflict is necessary. They know that hate is necessary. I know that hate is a motivator for action, and without hate, hate is an emotion. It has nothing to do, it should have nothing to do with decision-making. Decision-making is better done logically and practically and outside the realm of emotion. What does hate have to do with any necessity in terms of what you choose to do in your life? What you choose to do should be entirely separate from how you feel. That love that I'm talking about doesn't even need to be emotional love. It just needs to be a recognition of the interconnectedness of all of us. And if you want to be honest with the way reality is, then you increase your sense of self outward. And you look to the health of the whole for the health of yourself. Because a bunch of people fighting for the health of their community and themselves drain on each other, drain from the collective pool, and fight for resources. Whereas, because this is the nature of the production of wealth, whereas if all of these groups were thinking of the welfare of the total, then the pie would be bigger, which we're all sharing. Capitalism works, and socialism is that instinct to control the resources to funnel to particular people. Concentrated benefit, diffuse costs. And that's the same instinct behind isolationist nationalist parties. They want to look out for the welfare of their fellow man without looking to the welfare of the whole system. Now, the whole system isn't just humanity. It's also the life on this planet. It's also the geology of this planet. It's also the solar system and the galaxy and the universe. Probably not beyond that, because other universes would be causally disconnected from this Big Bang universe. But it's just a matter of recognizing the reality of how we are related. If you want the pie to be bigger, if you want society to flourish wherever it is, if you want individual cultures to flourish, then the way to do that is by acknowledging cooperation as the tool and not competition. Primarily cooperation. Now, if someone comes out advocating for competition, I will compete with them, and I will use my competitive instinct to beat that down, because I know that is antithetical to the political situation that I want for everyone. I don't even know if I'm clearing things up or just making things more confusing, but let me know. Just so bad at understanding what other people understand in what I'm saying. So far, not many people. Honestly, if I'm going to be judging things based on what I can read into other people's understandings in the comments, which is even more limiting than your understanding of what I'm saying through this long dialogue or monologue, it looks like people don't really understand. And I don't know how to be more clear, you know? And I am writing for people who advocate that as a way of being more clear and being more systematic. I am writing. I just need this space. I need this space, and I need the feedback in order to come up with the ways of communicating intelligibly. So I understand the instinct to give me advice on how to communicate, and I understand thinking of this as a cry for help on my part. I'm so lonely, no one understands me, all that bullshit. I don't really think of it that way. I think that I need this, I need that feedback on what you understand. You don't even need to, like, I understand this. You know, you don't need it explicitly. All you need to do is contribute something to the dialogue so that I have a sense of where this understanding is moving. You know, and obviously my understanding is not the primary, is not the greatest. So other people in the comments will contribute things that re-influence me to say something better next time. It's just, like I said, using YouTube as a brain. A lot of what I know has come from YouTube. A lot of the way I think has come from the way that other people on YouTube who I respect think. So, I don't know. It's such a perfect system for cooperating, YouTube. And yet, the tribal instinct, the competitive instinct, is so strong that people are just convinced of its superiority. And I'm tired of it. Doesn't mean that I'll stop making videos, but thanks for listening. Peace.